On an airport runway in Bangkok, an emergency operation is underway. Dozens of passengers have been injured and a man has died in mid-air turbulence.
But I saw people going completely horizontal, hitting the ceiling and getting massive gashes in their head.
Sheer terror and such shock. You know, you think, what's happening? And then it was shuddering, the whole plane was shuddering.
The cabin is wrecked. Passengers are terrified.
There was no warning at all, and I ended up hitting my head on the ceiling. Some poor people who were walking around ended up doing somersaults. It was absolutely terrible.
So how did it happen?
In this situation, the turbulence appears to have been quite quick, although it was sudden.
If you don't see it, then when you hit it, it can be a very, very instantaneous effect on the aircraft.
And does climate change mean there'll be more turbulence on future flights?
Studies have already been done and they found that instances of severe turbulence have increased by around 55%.
At Bangkok International Airport, a diverted Singapore Airlines plane comes into land. Moments later, medical teams race to help those on board. Inside the aircraft, an injured passenger is lifted to safety. On the tarmac, an emergency triage operation gets underway. The plane had hit turbulence and plummeted thousands of feet.
It happened that the seatbelt signs were not on. Anybody who were standing, especially the people within the lavatories, and were the most injured from what I've seen.
The whole plane was shuddering, and you think it's going to land on land, in the water, is it going to crack up? Because, great pieces were falling off and dropping on the floor, people getting hit in the head.
I'm just really glad to be reuniting with my family.
It was hard to really describe in words. No one expects that, really,
But I saw people from across the aisle, just like going completely horizontal, hitting the ceiling and landing back down in like really awkward positions. People getting massive gashes in their head, concussions. So it's quite a sight, I think.
One lady was laying on the floor, and when they tried to get her up, when the medics come on, she was screaming. It was awful.
One passenger, 73-year-old Jeff Kitchen from Gloucestershire, has died of a possible heart attack.
It was obvious the gentleman needed some help, so I got up and helped some other passengers get him out of his seat, and we laid him on the floor near the bulkhead so that the medics on the aeroplane, there were some passengers who thankfully were medics, could administer CPR to the gentleman on the aeroplane. They gave CPR for I think about 20 minutes or so, and my heart goes out to the wife of the man who lost his life. I spent a little bit of time talking to her and held her hand briefly. She was badly injured and she was naturally badly shocked as well.
With the passengers off the plane, the state of the cabin becomes clear. The memories of what had happened still raw.
There was no warning at all, and I ended up hitting my head on the ceiling. My wife did. Some poor people who were walking around ended up doing somersaults. It was absolutely terrible. And then suddenly it stopped and it was calm again. And the staff did their best to tend to the injured people. It was surreal. Suddenly it was just a little bit bumpy, and then suddenly it's like we fell off a cliff. And because we hadn't done so quickly, people bounced up and hit their head on the ceiling. And say people in the corridors, they were extremely unlucky.
The startle factor is pretty significant for both the crew and the passengers. If you've got passengers who appear to be floating around the cabin and you've got bottles and crockery and bags, and you will have seen what we call the rubber jungle, where the face masks, the oxygen masks actually come out because of the severity of the turbulence. And that's a pretty clear indicator that it was pretty severe.
Hours after the plane landed came an update on casualties.
Regarding the number of injuries, we currently have 7 cases of critical injuries. Cases of medium injuries are at 23, including a flight attendant. The rest are minor injury cases. We are keeping about 30 passengers in the airport's holding area, and they are ready to continue their journey back to Singapore. I can confirm 1 death from this incident.
Singapore Airlines flight SQ321 took off from London's Heathrow Airport at 10:38 p.m. on the 20th of May 2024. It was heading for Singapore. Travelling through European airspace, it passed over the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. The plane crossed the Bay of Bengal. It then hit turbulence over Myanmar. Flight tracking data suggests it descended several thousand feet in a matter of minutes. It was diverted to Bangkok from its intended route and landed at 9:45 or 3:45 local time.
As the flight took off from Heathrow, little had been known what was about to hit them because it was such a really pleasant spring evening in London. We'd had temperatures up to around 22 degrees, the skies were clear, the winds were light. It was probably the most uneventful of takeoffs you can imagine, with very little to no cloud above, a straight takeoff.
The aeroplane was flying at 37,000 feet. It was just about to enter Myanmar airspace. The forecast weather at the time, looking at the significant weather charts, indicated that there was convective cloud activity. Convective clouds, things like thunderstorm activity, large cloud buildups, going up all the way up to about 52,000 feet. That means particularly over the ocean, where you've got a lot of moist, warm air rising, can lead to really very large cloud buildup.
So this is satellite imagery from around the time the incident occurred. Let me just point out, we've got Myanmar here, Thailand, Singapore down here, but it's this area we're actually more concerned with. This is where we saw some big thunderstorms start to brew around the time the plane was getting close by. And of course, with thunderstorms, we always associate some areas of potentially severe turbulence.
It then descended to 31,000 feet, but over a period of 3 minutes. And that suggests that the crew were controlling the airplane to descend to a lower level to get out of the turbulence. If you don't see it, then when you hit it, it can be a very, very instantaneous effect on the aircraft, because the rate of movement of this vertical flow of air can be very significant.
Getting the aircraft out of trouble and safely down on the ground was managed by the pilots and air traffic control.
So the first thing we'd be doing is, obviously, you'd notice that on your radar screen the aircraft had left its level. You would ask the pilot, is everything okay, if he hadn't communicated, and then I would normally expect the pilot a few seconds later, once he'd recovered the aircraft in a stable position, to say that they've had an experience of turbulence and probably declare an emergency. In this case, he specifically did. He changed the aircraft squawk, that's the numbers that the controller will see on their screen, to 7700, which means they're in an emergency. And this is a way, if the pilot's very busy, he can do that and the controller instantly gets an alert on their screen that will say SOS. So they know that there's an emergency without him having to say something if he's very busy. When you've got a significant number of injuries, it would be standard protocol to divert to get them treated. If it was one person and it was fairly minor, they could be treated on board, they will quite often continue. Or perhaps if they were over somewhere where medical care isn't very good, you would want to continue. Most airlines, and I'm sure Singapore have this, have a direct link to something like MediLink, where they'll speak to doctors or medical professionals over the radio and say, this is the situation we have, what do you advise? And they have a lot of medical equipment on board, like defibrillators, etc. But in this case, when you've got, I believe it was around 50 people that were injured and obviously one fatality, then that's way too big for a smallish crew to cope with that many injuries, so they would divert as soon as possible.
Make sure that your seat belt is securely fastened during taxi, takeoff, and landing. To fasten, bring the two ends of the seat belt together until you hear a click.
Passengers on the flight will have watched the Singapore Airlines safety video.
So Singapore Airlines have a very good reputation for their airline. There's not been any significant safety issues that I'm aware of.
We are deeply saddened by this incident. It has resulted in one confirmed fatality and multiple injuries. On behalf of Singapore Airlines, I would like to express my deepest condolences to the family and loved ones of the deceased.
The plane involved was a Boeing 777.
The 777 is a very well established, very safe aeroplane. It was designed and built in the 80s and in production for a long time. Singapore Airlines pride themselves on having a very young fleet. This one was 16 years old, which is neither here nor there really. It's the airplanes are maintained to a first-class standard. They're stripped down routinely. They have a check cycle. So basically, intents and purposes, it's like a new airplane. I think any incident is damaging to the reputation of both the airline and the manufacturer because there's nowhere to hide. And in the ultra-connected world, you have all sorts of theories emerging online. It wobbles people, it makes people concerned, naturally. However, it has to be said, would I get on a 777 with Singapore Airlines? Yes, tomorrow. I wouldn't hesitate.
I mean, it looks shocking when you see the pictures of it, but it is very rare to have anything as severe as this. And the main thing is to actually listen when they say we advise you to keep your seatbelt done up at all times when you're sitting down, because it's very easy, I think, to just relax. They turn the seatbelt sign off and you automatically remove your seatbelt and think that you're fine, but this proves it can happen very suddenly. You don't always get a warning beforehand.
The cabin crew do an announcement giving the safety procedures at the beginning of flight. Almost everybody's either reading their paper or looking at their iPhone. And in fact, I would thoroughly encourage passengers to ensure that their seatbelts are always fastened, and wherever possible they're seated with their seatbelts fastened throughout the flight.
And making sure your belongings are secured when you can, because obviously injuries can occur when things fall out of the lockers, particularly if there's loose stuff around as well that could fly up and hit you. So yeah, if you're not using something, store it out of the way. Like a laptop, for example, if that's loose and hits you, it's probably not going to kill you, but it's not going to do you a lot of good. So yeah, making sure you put things away when you're not using them.
We're just going to look at an Airbus simulator that pilots spend many, many hours in, practicing for this sort of eventualities that hopefully they'll never see. This is our navigation display, particularly relevant in this case, because the navigation display will have overlaid a radar picture showing the convective air and the turbulent air. The navigation display here is what the crew would be looking at in order to determine what it is that they're going to be flying into along their green track line.
So pilots have recurrent training, normally every 6 months, so they do train for every scenario, including weather avoidance, turbulence, sudden drops like this, how to recover the aircraft when something like that happens.
Light to moderate turbulence you'll experience on almost every flight you go through, and it's perfectly safe. The severe turbulence is the one that can really cause problems, because you do get a vertical movement within the aeroplane, typically, because you've gone through rapidly rising air followed by rapidly descending air, and you can imagine that you suddenly have that, the aeroplane moves literally from underneath you. And so that's why if the aeroplane descends, it can appear that people are actually rising and floating to the ceiling of the airplane. It's actually the other way around. The people are staying stationary, the airplane is dropping down onto them. And it's usually only a matter of a few feet, to be honest.
Turbulence is essentially rapidly changing speeds of air, effectively. There are a few different types of turbulence which are important to pilots. One is called mechanical turbulence. This is mainly linked to hills and mountains or something that's on the ground. So if the wind's coming along, reaches the mountains, it lifts up into the atmosphere, but what it can do is it can start to do what we call little eddies, little circulations. And so these rapid changes in wind speed direction and whether it's going up and down means that when the plane is coming along, it can reach them and it can bounce around quite quickly. Then there's convective turbulence. I think most of us experience this as the plane takes off. Convective clouds are effectively clouds that form on pockets of air which are rising through the atmosphere. So when you take off, the second you first hit that little layer of cloud, I think we've all noticed it, you often get that moment where your stomach drops, the plane just jumps around a tiny bit. But the most severe of the convective clouds is the thundercloud, the cumulonimbus cloud. It can stretch tens of thousands of feet into the sky. So a plane coming and reaching one of those thunderstorm cumulonimbus clouds, if it hits an updraft, for instance, the plane naturally wants to rise. The pilot then has to make adjustments to bring it down, just to keep on a steady level. But of course, if it all of a sudden moves along and hits a draft which is going down, the pilot's trying to keep it down, they both combine to cause this sudden drop. The other type of turbulence is something called clear air turbulence. And as the name suggests, it happens in clear air. You can't see it. It is most common around jet streams. These are ribbons of fast flowing air way up in the atmosphere. The planes actually use them, the pilots use them to get from one place to another quite quickly. But because through the air you have rapid changes in wind speed, so it's very strong in the jet stream, it can be very slower either side of it, that wind difference can cause the air to move around. So as the plane is coming, hits that, it can bounce quite violently. Of course, investigations will determine exactly what type of air turbulence that plane hit.
Experts say climate change makes extreme weather more likely. So does that mean turbulence will become a bigger problem in the future?
Turbulence, especially severe turbulence, is likely to become a bit more common in the future. Studies have already been done. Reading University did one on transatlantic flights, and they found that instances of severe turbulence have increased by around 55%. Largely linked to our changing climate, and if the climate continues to warm, we're expecting to see that severe turbulence, instances of at least, increase even further. But thanks to research done into how the jet stream is increasing, how severe turbulence is becoming more common, some of those factors are being filtered in to computer models to try and better predict where we're going to see severe turbulence in the future.
It was an incident that no one anticipated and none of those involved will ever forget. Singapore's Prime Minister promised a thorough investigation. Many people who've seen the pictures of what happened may be looking for reassurance about their next flight. Experts say the chances of being caught in something similar are slim.
I mean, fortunately, it's very rare. My entire career of 23 years, I don't think I ever saw anything anywhere near as severe as that.
I'd say that the people who want to get home more than anybody else, the crew of the aircraft and all of the crew on board want to avoid any form of passenger discomfort, not least severe turbulence. So book your holiday, have a lovely time, enjoy the flight, and don't worry about the turbulence would be my advice.